Welcome to Gamer Noob. Today we're interviewing game designer Tom Knaus. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Cody.
Thanks so much for being with us, Tom. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and why we're interviewing you, take it away.
Okay. I'm Tom Knaus. I'm a freelance game writer who predominantly writes for Frog God Games. And I am here because we are going to be doing a Kickstarter very, very soon for a project that I wrote. It's called Tehuatl, Tehuatl. It will consist of 2 books. The first book will be a system neutral book. It is a guidebook to the island itself. So it's a gazetteer, as well as discussing the people, the religions, the traditions, and a general overview of this expansion to the Lost Lands campaign setting. And the second book is an adventure book. It will consist of 3 adventures, one written by me, one written by one of my friends, Rob Manning, who's done a lot of work for Wright Games, and he's done some for Frog God as well. And the other is written by Tim Hitchcock. So if you are a big Paizo fan, you should recognize him. He wrote a lot of the adventure paths for Paizo. So those should be going to Kickstarter shortly, and our stretch goals will add a few more adventures to that book if we make them. Yay!
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yay! And we'll
so
also
all y'all listening, go out and find their Kickstarter.
yeah. We'll also be adding a bestiary as well with art. So if we really do well, we'll be adding that. And so we're really looking forward to this. It is a Mesoamerican inspired campaign setting. So we did a lot of research on this. We did some amazing art. I don't know if I can share you files with you guys, but I can show you the covers.
I would love that. Yeah. And we can, if we're allowed to post them on social media and stuff, we definitely do that.
Yeah.
We're all about cool art here.
Yeah. So we actually said when Bill was talking, Bill Webb is our COO, and he was talking about this project. He actually said, I think this is the best art we've ever done on a Frog God Games project.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. And, I think it speaks a lot, too, because we had a lot of artists from Central and South America who worked on this project. And
awesome. Yeah.
For them, they were really, really into this because, this was a chance to really celebrate some of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would write art notes to them, and I would say, the dress is like this, and they go, yeah, we know.
we know.
We can figure that part out. So I'm like, all right, want to make sure you know. So,
yeah, tell me a bit more about the process of research and input and that give and take between all the people that were working on it with you. I'm really curious about that, especially in Mesoamerica is such a different place and aesthetic and culture and life from me in suburban America. So can you tell me about that process of really diving into such a new and different culture?
It required a ton of reading and a ton of watching things and also bouncing things off of people. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of speaking to someone from 16th century Tenochtitlan. They simply don't exist.
Right. Yeah.
So I can't, this is not like I was doing a modern project where I was doing a modern culture and I would contact somebody who lived in the area and says, doing an interview like this and get more details. So without that luxury, we really have to rely upon, written sources and, viewing some programs that were done on it. There's not as much as you would imagine what was done on this particular topic. So you really had to expand your horizons and to look into things and also bounce things off of, this is still fictional. So we didn't create a setting where we're going to be playing in 16th century Mexico.
Right.
We added certain dimensions to it. So one of the first conversations that Tim and I had when we were talking about this is, well, what do we do about this? And what do we do about that? And one of the things was, what do we do about steel? Because in obviously Mesoamerica, there was no iron, there was no steel. There was iron, but they weren't, forging it. So, we kind of said, well, what do we do with that? And the idea was, well, you know what? It's still a fantasy setting. There's still other peoples on the island who have that technology. So I think we introduce it. But again, this is a very hot, humid climate where walking around in plate mail armor is probably not going to be very comfortable.
Yeah, it's a bit different from European sword and sorcery. Yeah.
Right, and armor rusts. So in steel rusts. So in a setting where that would happen, that was something that we took into consideration and said, you can do it. Other things we went both ways with. Well, one of the things we did was to take a natural progression, and the Mesoamericans had rubber. It's not the rubber we know today, but it was very similar to it. And we took the next step and figured that, well, over time they vulcanized it. So we added vulcanized rubber to the environment, but we didn't add other things like horses. We decided horses and beasts of burden was kind of like, that was kind of like part of their the history there. And another misnomer that people have is that the Mesoamericans didn't know about the wheel. That's incorrect. They did know about it. It simply wasn't practical for their environment because they lived in a swamp and a wetland. So even if I had a horse to pull my wagon was getting stuck.
Right. Yeah.
The difference that it makes. So they relied predominantly on canoes and water for transportation purposes. So those are a lot of the ideas we had to bounce off at the beginning and say, what are we going to add and what are we going to keep that was true to the setting itself.
Making it feel like Mesoamerica, but still have some of the elements that people are expecting from a fantasy setting. And yeah.
Right. One of the things too was also that, obviously we celebrated the indigenous people of the island in this particular product, but it's still connected to the Lost Lands as a greater whole. So if you really wanted to play a character that originates in Akados or originates in Libanos, and that's what you're familiar with, you have that option to do that. You'll just be seeing the world in a different perspective because, you're going to be more the outsider in this environment than vice versa.
When you're doing these types of projects where you're kind of developing a world, is that like a usual exercise for you? Is kind of like stepping back very early in the history, then going like, okay, how do we imagine technology develops and why? Like you were saying, like water transport was very important versus the wheel, and they had rubber but not this. Does that like inform a lot of how the setting looks and what kind of stuff you do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to, again, keep it true to the sources, but we also wanted to make those natural progressions, what seemed to make sense to us. Another avenue too was it is an island. So we felt it was really necessary to introduce warships into this particular setting because naturally, if you're going to travel anywhere on an island over ocean, you're going to need a larger vessel than a canoe. You're not going to be able to go very far on a canoe traveling across the ocean.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
We're going to need a bigger boat, with Robert Shaw. Yeah. So we felt that we needed a bigger boat. So we said, you know what? At this point, they've built bigger boats. So they have a formidable navy as well as a land army on this island. So we thought anything that existed, what made sense, we progressed in, and what didn't make sense or wouldn't fit in a fantasy world, we kind of said, we'll keep that out for now.
So Cody, talking about world building, Cody does a different podcast with a friend that's all about world building. And so they build a world like every week. Do you have any tips for people or like, I guess, uncommon things that you always be sure to add into your world building? Or is like that's part of your world building process that isn't maybe obvious to somebody who's just like sitting down like, I'm going to build a world for my D&D campaign. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, if you could give me the edge on my co-host, that'd be
great. Building a world, I think the one thing important about building a world is to have given an organic feel. I don't like a world that seems very cookie cutter, or it seems like it was just, well, we need this, so we have to introduce this element to the world. I like a world that feels like it actually grew naturally, like one progression led to another instead of there was a sudden introduction of X, Y, and Z. There was a sudden introduction of this. There was a sudden introduction of that. To me, that just doesn't feel real. I like it where you can follow the timeline and you can see the events progress, and the events as they progress make sense. Now, obviously, there are going to be serendipitous discoveries and that sort of thing, but I just wanted to feel like it progressed naturally. So technology develops slowly. It doesn't like immediately leap from, we discovered the fire to the next thing you know, we're building firearms. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So it's really just slowing things down. I know we want to accelerate things because we live in a world where things accelerate so quickly. Like we were talking beforehand, when I was in college, there was a computer lab. The notion of having a laptop was completely alien. If you wanted to do something on a computer, you had to go to a lab room. You had your floppy disk if you were lucky, and then you stuck your floppy disk in there and you typed whatever it was. Sometimes you needed an appointment because the computer lab could get very busy at certain times. And you did that. And I think as modern people, we expect that. We think that things accelerate so quickly. You know, I remember an era before nobody had a cell phone. I don't think I had a cell phone until like 30 or 25 or something like that. So we have to fight that modern inclination to make things develop really quick and to make them take time. Things take time, things move slowly, and just apply that reasoning to creating a world. And I think that's a key thing that I think is very important, and that's something we wanted to do here. We didn't want to have things progress by leaps and bounds like super quick. We wanted things to make sense and have an ebb and flow to how the world developed, that, you know, peoples rose and people fell, cities rose and cities fall. Something's there to take its place sometimes it's nothing there to take its place. Sometimes it's just into chaos and ruin and waits for the next group of people to come along. So you know, that's my world building tip.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of there being ruins in your world. You know what I mean? Like, even
there's a history there.
There's a history there, a past that you can kind of see and explore. So something I was curious about, and I think you've kind of already touched on this a little bit just in the conversation we were having. What about this setting was exciting to you? Like why this thing? You know what I mean? Because it is kind of like it is not the standard sword and sorcery thing. So like what brought you to the setting that you're writing in right now?
You know, I'm the kind of person who likes to do something different than what everyone else is doing. So that's part of me. But, you know, I grew up and I remember playing Dungeons & Dragons when I was very young. And I remember being introduced to C1, which is the Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan. And while I know it's not, you know, quote unquote, true to history per se, I remember seeing the art and seeing the, you know, the culture and being like, you know, that's really cool. And it came with an art book. I don't know if you're old enough like me to remember it. It actually had a flip book of art. The same with Tomb of Horrors did as well. So that was one of like the big selling points of it. So, you know, then you take a look at the Deities and Demigods book, and they have the Central American mythos in it, and I'm like, oh wow, this is really fascinating. These stories are really incredible. So, you know, I started looking into it more, and the opportunity came for me at Frog God Games, where unlike most times where somebody tells you what we want you to do, or you pitch something and somebody says yes or no, they came to me and said, what do you want to do? And I said,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it's cool. Yeah. So this is what I want to do. And they said, done. Go for it. So I'm like, okay. So I ran with it and read a lot and learned. Am I allowed to swear or no?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. No, I learned a lot. I'll just say. I won't say. I learned a boatload of information about this civilization, and the more you learn, the more fascinated you became about, you know, what they did and how they accomplished it. One of the first civilizations on the planet to have compulsory education. So
wow, yeah.
You went to school from an early age, from probably around the age of 6 or 7. They didn't have an alphabet. They used pictographs. So, but you were told to understand how they worked. You were taught various, you know, boys were taught warfare, but they were also taught mathematics. You can learn architecture, art. You know, girls went to a different school that was more centered on maintaining the home. But, you know, it was just incredible, all the things that they had done. And it's really tragic in a lot of ways that their civilization was, you know, overshadowed because it vanished so quickly in the wake of, you know, of the European conquest. So, you know, I just really wanted to have people have an appreciation for what these people did. And, you know, and it's just incredible that that it's amazing when you realize how quickly they did vanish. That the civilization fell basically within 2 years.
Wow.
It's kind of mind-boggling how quickly
Yeah.
it unraveled, for a variety of reasons. And I'm not trying to give a history lesson and going into all of it.
No, that's fine. Like you're managing to make me very interested just in that detail.
Yeah.
Right, I'm hoping for the after podcast where we get the history lesson now.
Right, yeah.
Are you guys history majors or?
No,
No.
engineering.
Oh, okay.
Caitlin and I are librarians, though, so
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Very nice.
Does that so we've seen some of your previous interviews, and I remember you've mentioned that thing about education. Does that work its way into the setting like that you wrote?
Yes, it definitely does, because the first adventure is actually set at a school.
great.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's one of the schools was called the Comic, and then sometimes my Nawal is not the greatest in the world. It's called the Kamachak. And that would be one of the schools that would be more for usually there were schools for nobility and the commoners, and this is kind of like in the middle of that. So
Okay.
we do discuss education a lot. We discuss law. Now again, it is fictional, so we took inspiration from Aztec law and we made it our own in some ways. So they had something that was called the Pedicali, and the Pedicali was the penitentiary.
Okay.
So I created kind of like an Oz-like version of the penitentiary. So it's kind of set in the middle of this swamp, and the Aztec Pedicali was probably worse than being receiving capital punishment. It was just awful. I mean,
Wow.
So we just kind of made it upped it a notch.
Yeah.
So we thought, that would be a cool addition to it. So
Nice.
yeah, it's amazing how things can get worse once you introduce magic into the setting. Like, this was bad. Now we can heal you and make it worse.
Yeah.
right, we can keep you alive. And one of the things we did too, one of the other crazy ideas I have, and I tell my wife these ideas sometimes, she goes, "You're freaking nuts."
I was gonna say it's really scary how quickly you and Zach were both just like, yes, the implications of healing are nightmarish.
So there's one of the parts of the setting where there's a location where all of these, I'm going to say monsters, so I don't give it away. All of these monsters gather together under certain days, and they have essentially the equivalent of a human cook-off. So they do like a contest, but they only take pieces of meat a little bit at a time
Oh, yeah.
and cook them. So you see like part of your leg going into the frying pan, but you're still alive.
Yeah, that's a new level of torture. Yeah.
And they save the organ meat for last because that's the tastiest, they think. So
We did start this off saying if we should talk about what you've been cooking, and maybe we don't want to do that.
Yeah, now I'm concerned.
I had spaghetti meatballs that I made this yesterday. So.
Yeah. What kind of meat was in those meatballs?
It was the organic grass fed, so. It
No
wasn't an
players were
adventure.
harmed.
It
Yeah.
wasn't a stray adventure or anything like that.
No players were harmed in the making of this.
No players were
meatball.
harmed in the making of this, or characters to buy.
Or yeah. That's good. You mentioned I don't remember the name of the language, but you mentioned learning it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Nahuatl?
Nawal.
I'm really into linguistics and language. Can you tell us more about how you incorporated that into the book and what it was like trying to recreate a 16th century language like that?
So we added a pronunciation guide in the book. So one of the
That's good. Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that most people do is, and I'm guilty too. So was when you saw the TL, most people go tuttle, and it's not tuttle. It's just like it's like a little long.
Okay.
Yeah. So when it's spelled, when you see the book it's spelled it's spelled Tehuatl. People will normally go Tehuatl, and it's no.
Yep. I did that. Yep.
Right.
It's a wall.
Because the
Okay.
HU becomes a W. TL becomes like a longer L, so it becomes Tawal.
Wall. Okay.
So what we did for the book was we tried to use as many real Nawal words as we could in certain places. The language can get very long in terms of words, so you can have a word that could be like 16 letters long. So for obviously our audience is predominantly English speaking. So, we kind of made a decision early on that if we're going to make words or make proper names, let's try and keep them as short as possible. Like keep them, still have the flavor of the language, but not
Mhm.
have that goes, Lama Laxaligo Hison, and you're going to have to make that. They're going to be running the adventure, and you run into Lama Tala, and then they go, So, we tried to keep them short to make it easier for our audience to be able to use them and pronounce them while still trying to stay authentic. A lot of the words in there too, there's no words obviously for certain things because we don't have a translation for them. So what we often would do is like take bits and clips of other words and mix them together, and so make them a little short and use them for that, just to give the flavor and to immerse people into the language. And as I've said in other interviews, I don't expect people to pronounce words correctly. I still don't pronounce words correctly, and I've been reading this for a year and a half. So we just want you to have as much buy-in as you want. If you want to have full buy-in and you want to pronounce it correctly and study the language, awesome. I am so pleased.
That's me.
There you go. If you don't, and you're just like, I'm really cool with this, but I'm really stumbling with the words, well, I'm not going to come out of the book and smack you in the head for saying something wrong. So
yeah, Cody appreciates that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really appreciate a pronunciation guide because I can't read any fantasy name because they're always goofy. So having an actual pronunciation guide and like backing behind the names, I'm like, great, there's like an actual thing to learn here.
I mean, you have it better than I do, where Caitlin and I will read the same books, and I'll be like, this is a difficult name. It's going to be the R guy, because his name begins with R. And Caitlin's like, how do you say this name, Zach? And I'm like, I just...
R guy.
It's the R guy.
Duh.
That R guy is an R, the letter R, or you are. He's our guy.
Oh, I mean, he could be.
Okay.
No, Zach gets really annoyed in books if they have a bunch of like fantasy names that all start with the same letter, then because then he can't tell them apart really easily. And I'm like, oh, it's so and so, obviously, and he's like, it just starts with an R, Caitlin.
They all start with R's. It's hard.
Yeah.
I read Lord of the Rings when I was like a teenager, and I kept getting confused between Sauron and Saruman because they look so close.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Like, hey, is it the same person? I'm very confused.
It's exactly that. I'd be like, oh, the villain has a name of S, and then I'm like, oh no, they're different. I have to pay more attention.
Yeah, exactly. That totally threw me off when I was a teenager. I was just like,
At least they're connected somehow.
Yes, at least
and that would have worked out.
Actually, it kind of didn't work out because it made it more confusing. Because if they were obviously enemies, I would have paid more attention to and realized that they weren't the same person. But since they were both kind of on the same goal, that didn't really dawn on me until much later in the book.
Oh, right, yeah. I guess it kind of changes the tone of like you think that their combined entity is a lot more powerful than they are separately, I guess. It might have seemed the whole quest might have seemed more daunting with that reading. Yeah. Truly insurmountable odds.
Right, exactly.
Do you have a favorite part of this particular volume? We've kind of gone over a lot of the research that you did and some interesting tidbits. Do you have a favorite thing, or like what do you think makes it stand out? Like, why should people be sure to pick up this specific one? What's your favorite bit?
I really think that the overview that we give is really very comprehensive and really does a good job of presenting this location, and it's tying all of the ends together, tying all the people together, tying their religion together, tying their traditions together. We go into law, we explain property law, and again, I'm a quasi lawyer, I guess the way I call it. We explain it, but not, to boring details. We just explain how it works. We explain how religion ties into people's lives. We explain how people got around, how technology developed, how the people evolved from, because this island has a lengthy history as we go into in the book, and the people change a lot from 10,000 years when this kind of starts to the present. They go through several different metamorphoses. There's a rebellion, there's an uprising. That changes fundamentally the way the island develops, and it changed from a political, a religious, and a social standpoint. And we go into how it changed it. And I think, the devil is in the details a lot of the times. And I think you're going to be able to immerse yourself in those details. It still gives you a broad overview, but, the deep dive lets you really, get a good sense of what this whole thing is really about, and lets you really immerse yourself in it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
When you're running a game, I think that kind of information is either invaluable or made up haphazardly on the spot,
Mhm.
where inevitably you have to know some weird social like something obscure that your party decides to wander into, and you're like, I don't know how any normal person would respond to what you guys are doing right now. So like having something codified can be definitely beneficial.
Yeah, like when the players decide, we really need a lawyer to sort this out, which
Right.
kind of happens sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
it's not infrequent that your general campaigning party ends up breaking some laws.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean that too.
Right. We explain how the judicial system works. So there's actual different judicial system for a noble and a commoner, but we also explain how people become noblemen and how people become commoners. And one of the things that we put in there was that the gods in this world weren't gods at one time. They were ordinary people who rose up, led this rebellion. They ultimately succeed, but in the process, they're then elevated to godhood status. And one of the classes of nobility are the people who were either their descendants while they were mortal or relatives. And that's one of the ways that people attained nobility, as well as through, in a very martial culture, demonstrating your courage on the battlefield, or doing something else in another field that merits celebrated status. You were a great artist. You were the architect who built that vast pyramid. You were a mathematician who devised a formula for how to plant crops better, or something like that. So, we do go into those details and explain the judicial system, how it works, how an actual trial would work. We don't go in again, and it's not like 30 pages of trial material. It's like, a paragraph explaining how it would work and what a proper trial would, entail, and how a crime would be investigated and who would investigate it and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, enough detail you could do it, but not in enough detail to bore you to tears. So.
Yeah, I seem to remember one of our D&D campaigns that Zach ran that we went to a courthouse to steal something, and so of course he had to come up with all these courthouse details. So I'm glad that you provide those things for us players who go to a courthouse.
Yes.
It's very useful for when, as a DM, I have never been to a courthouse, and they're like, well, what does a floor look like? Can I break through it? I'm like, I don't know what courthouses look like in real life, let alone when you have magic involved.
Right, yeah. We've touched on art a little bit. I think Cody had some questions.
Yeah, I was waiting to ask about art, but I'm also so I think this might be maybe more common for the generation of people that are downloading books and no longer buying hard copy, or I just want a cheat sheet of bullet points that are the RPG system. But when I first got into it, right, I had second edition D&D books, and looking through them was fun because they were amazing to look at. They had fun artwork in them and stuff. So I just wanted to ask how, just in general, for the hobby of playing role-playing games, where do you see art fitting into that, and how important is it? Oh, cool, you sent us some art for the
Yay.
I'm going to send you more. Art is critical. What is the first, what's the old saying? You judge a book, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, how many people go in the store and they look at a book and they pick it up, and what exactly do? They judge the book by its cover.
Gotta see the cover. Yep.
Right. If they see the cover and they like it and they think it's really cool, they're going to take a second look. If they take a look at the cover and they just go, oh, that's awful. This is amateurish. I don't like it. Yada, yada, yada. They're going to put it down. I mean, I work a booth at a convention. I've been doing this booths or conventions for years. And the first thing everyone does when they walk in, take a look at the cover. If it intrigues them, they open it up. If they open it up, they start flipping through it. If they see the art or something that they're not speed reading in the book.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
they're reading the contents. Oh my God. They're looking to flip through the art and to see what the art looks like. If they like it, the next thing they do is flip it over, look at the price, and put it down. But no,
But that's why you kickstart.
right, that's why you kickstart. No. So I mean, art really draws people in, and it's just so critical because it's eye-catching. Here's a choice. I can buy a book in full color with this amazing art. And again, I'm at a convention, so I don't have time to read the book, or if I'm not familiar with it, I didn't get a review. I could buy a color book for $50 that has incredible art. I could buy a black and white book for $40 that looks like somebody drew it with a stick figure. Which am I going to pick? I'm going to pick the one with the nice art because art pictures get our attention. So it's really, I think art is a huge driving factor in an RPG book. If you have an RPG book that has, at best, mediocre art, you're going to struggle because it's the eye test, and people like to look at it and see it, and it makes such a difference.
I'm loving the art that you're sending us right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say
We'll
the
definitely have to
last
include
one
it.
of someone magically throwing a piece of corn looks pretty cool, actually.
Right?
Everyone likes. We call her Maze Lady. Everybody likes Maze Lady.
She's awesome. Yeah.
Super cool. I'm like, yeah, she's cool.
That leads into a question I have though. Like, how is magic different? I don't know if that's the right thing, but like, how is it unique from like the other regions in your setting in this new area?
We added a bunch of new. Well, for 5e and Pathfinder and Swords and Wizards, we added a whole bunch of new spells. We added new equipment that is both magical and non-magical. We added new class options for both systems. So the magic system obviously still works within the overall system, your engine, whether it's Pathfinder or 5e. We wanted to give the items and the spells a very unique flavor, unique to this location. So you're going to find, weapons that would be here. One of the weapons was, and again, I'm probably going to butcher it, Maquail, because it's very hard to pronounce. And what it is, it's a wooden club that's kind of flat, and it has obsidian blades that run along the edge. Ridiculously sharp, but also kind of brittle, because if you hit something really hard with the obsidian, it's going to chip. Mm-hmm. So, we added items like that into there. We also added things that were related to the gods, or we added things that were kind of mundane items and gave them magical properties. So, pumpkin seeds. There's actually a magic item called pumpkin seeds, because pumpkins native here in the New World. They weren't in the Old World. Chili peppers. So we introduced there's a chili pepper, almost like a pepper spray made out of chili pepper. So
that would be Cody's weapon of choice.
So those are the kind of things. So we didn't change the magic system. It's still, Pathfinder or 5e. It's just got a Twa flavor to it.
Okay, that makes sense, because I mean, reinventing the magic system would be difficult and make things less accessible in a lot of ways. If you're like, well, you can be a wizard from here, but you need to learn a whole new rule set and everything is completely different.
That's a totally different book.
Right.
So is D&D 5e your favorite system to add to? Do you have a different favorite system to run or play?
I like writing items for 5e and Pathfinder. There's different challenges with both. Pathfinder and 5e have different language and different terminology, so you have to be very careful to use the proper terminology.
You have to be switching all the time if you're writing for both.
Yeah, it's like a universal translator, right? You have to switch because certain terms are used in Pathfinder that are not used in 5e, and 5e uses certain terms that are. I think 5e gives you allows you to be a little more free-flowing with your design than Pathfinder does, because Pathfinder is a little more how can I say it, regimented in how you create things. There's a formula to figure out how much this item is worth and how much it costs to make it and what spells go in to make it and kind of what it does. And in 5e, it's just kind of like I can assign a value to it based upon, comparing it to existing items and putting it into that broad category instead of calculating down to the nano gold piece how much this costs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of that's the big advantage. Plus Pathfinder has so much material out there for it that it's kind of hard to break a lot of new ground, whereas 5e doesn't have as much. It's got a plenty, but not as much. So
Yeah.
I was actually curious about that. Is there like a market share issue if like, oh, I want to write a module for some other system, and it's like, well, percentage wise, 5% of the RPG playing population plays this one system. So like, is that like a problem of, but then you brought up, is it also like a saturation thing that certain systems it's hard to get into just because there's so much?
Yeah. We produce materials for 3 different systems, 5e, Pathfinder, and Swords and Wizardry, which is our own first E retro clone. Now, for a while, when Pathfinder 2 got announced, we stopped doing Pathfinder because the Pathfinder sales just went, ooh, and they just did a complete nosedive. There's been a bit of a bounce back after Pathfinder 2 came out. So we are starting to do it, but a lot of what we do or what system you produce something for is based on market share. So 5e is still the king. It still accounts for over 50% of our sales. I would say probably 60 to 70. Again, I don't have full access to the sales numbers. That's just what I've heard. Pathfinder, though, and Swords and Wizardry have a very loyal following for us. And many of our Pathfinder and Swords and Wizardry players are also collectors, and they like to collect special edition books. They like to collect maps. They like to have the complete kit and caboodle. So when they come to a Kickstarter, they're not just buying the main book and the adventure book. They're going to be buying all the supplements, all the add-ons, all the special edition versions, all the map, all everything. So in terms of numbers wise, they're smaller. In terms of dollars wise, it brings them more in line with the 5e audience for us.
Do you like playing in 5e the best or Pathfinder? Or do you, when you're just like relaxing and playing, do you have a favorite system?
I like Pathfinder up until a certain level. And then I find it becomes a little unwieldy. And it becomes just too many numbers and bonuses. And Pathfinder from like 3rd to 5th level is nice. It's sweet. It works well. You can have your modularity, but it's not over the top. Once you start hitting like 6th to 8th, it's still okay, but it's getting a little clunky. You can hear the car, I can hear the tire starting to unravel.
Right.
And then later on, it kind of comes undone and you're on the side of a road with a tire jack trying to change the tire. 5e doesn't have the modularity that Pathfinder has, but it doesn't have the exponential power curve that Pathfinder has. So in terms of playing it, I like it for its simplicity, but you do miss some of the deep details you can do or the customization you can do with Pathfinder. So I would say for simplicity, you want to sit down and play a game 5e.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that when like I said, I started out in 2nd edition because I worked at a Jimmy John's and a kind of stonery guy that I worked with was like, hey man, you want some D&D books? And I've never given those back to him. So I kind of accidentally stole those from him. But then, as I went through it, got stuck in Pathfinder for a long time. And for me, and this is terrible, it's well, you can get the books for free. It's great, and there's a lot of support material. And then I played 5th edition and I'm like, I'm not good at this numbers game. I thought I was.
Did he give you those 2nd edition books in a back alley anywhere? Or was it actually in the store? Buddy, come here. I got something.
I got 2nd edition books for you.
I got 2nd edition books.
But
we started in Pathfinder, I think, when we all first started playing and didn't really know each other, and eventually we switched to D&D 5e, and I am also happier.
I mean, it also helps when Cody isn't giving weapons that crit on a 16 up.
This is the problem that I had with Pathfinder, as I broke Pathfinder by going I'm gonna create a custom item and did not think about the implications.
Oh, okay. So you gave something that critted on 16 to 20?
Yeah.
Oh no! And then so now it's a 10 to 20. Yeah, everything is a crit. Oh my God! It's a war pick, so it does 4 times crit damage. Okay. Yeah.
That's
And this
basically
is
what happened.
this is the type of number game that I never even considered getting into, and then you hand it to someone else, and they're like, "Oh."
Well, it was bad because like at that time we didn't have separate campaigns we were doing, so Cody and I would switch off. So Cody's like end of his arc, he's like, here's a weapon that crits on 16s, and then it's like, okay, Zach, your turn, deal with this weapon, and I'm like, oh no,
Deal with this weapon that crits
oh
on 16.
no. So someone's going around hitting,
Yeah.
critting every attack, and I'm like, I can't do anything with any enemies now. And Cody's like, I don't see a problem.
Of course
Somehow
not.
we're still friends.
That's
We're
the one
stronger
danger
for it.
you do when you're designing magic items. You're designing certain things. Is you always want to take a look at it and see how can I break this? How can I make it just make the whole game unravel? And you got to really be careful about doing that. If my opinion is, if I'm going to mess up, I'd rather mess up on the side of nerfing something than overpowering it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, and I can understand that if you're like designing for stability, and this is if you're homebrewing something, you can kind of change it on the fly. But if it's written in the book, your player, that's
It's
what your
printed.
players are gonna say,
Right.
Yeah.
It says in the book I could do that. Why not?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to thrust anybody in that position where they have to do that. So
Right,
I try and do I'm not perfect, so there could be things that slip through. But I don't consciously go there and say, well, my other second fallback is, would every character want this? Because if every character would want this, it's probably too powerful.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's most of what I have for me. Do we have like a final question that we want to do before wrapping up? And
I enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, it's nice talking to you guys. It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've done so many of these, but it's an interesting dynamic when there's more than one person, because when it's one person, it's just different. It's a different dynamic. It introduces more ideas when you have more people. When you have one person, it's just very kind of like scripted, and this is more ad lib improv. So
Organic, you might say, like the world building.
yeah, like I use my meatballs, not adventurer characters.
Right. Yeah.
You keep kind of trailing off when you talk about what are in these meatballs, and I'm wondering if it's Discord or.
Also, if you want to promote, we're doing a Frog God Game Day on Discord. So if you guys are Discorders and you want to check out our game day, by all means.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If you want to send us that, when is that going to be?
September 12th to the 13th, I believe.
Perfect. Okay. You should send us that link and we'll be sure to post about it when we post this interview.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. Well,
Yeah. So any final plug, just so that everybody has all of the info for your Kickstarter and
absolutely.
can chomp at the bit to buy it.
Mm-hmm. So Tual, we're hoping it's coming out this week. It's supposed to come out very soon. Kickstarter's dragging their feet a little bit, but stop by Frog God Games. Frog God also has a presence on Facebook. That's probably our best source of information. So just search Frog God Games and like our page. You can also follow me personally. I'm Tom Knaus. I'll have a little Nandor with a little pink profile picture.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you can follow me there. We also do post on Instagram. So I don't think we have a big Twitter presence, and I definitely don't have a Twitter account. So those are the places you can find us on socials. You can also check us out at Discord. We have a very large Discord server. We're also there. And of course, froggodgames.com is another place, but that's mostly our web store. There's not going to be too much information on there other than buying the products. So the main source is probably Facebook and Discord to keep in touch with everything we're doing. And, I go on Discord a good amount to keep in touch with the fans and, plug products and do that sort of thing. So support Tual, support Adventures in Tual, and it's been great.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's been fantastic to have you.
Thanks. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Gamer Noob. You can find links for Tom Knaus, Frog God Games, all artwork we discussed on this show, and social media links for the Wandering Gamer Network in the description. Until next time, Wanderers.